here we are. Is everybody hearing me? I think the voice should be working this time. There's been some trouble previously, but okay, and it's just 7 o'clock over here as well. Let me just hear you from a little bit in the chat. No problem. Okay, yes, everybody working. Yeah, so as you can also see here in the screen, today's lecture will be about middle game, and I tried to get a little bit more theoretical approach to it, so that well, of course, we have a sample game. I just took one sample game from my own professional games, and we will look at that in detail. But also, I thought a little bit about how to structure our thinking about the middle game, and I will also be covering that a little bit. Also, before we go into the lecture, I would just like to advertise the European Go Congress this year. Is there anybody in the chat who is going? Anybody going to the European Go Congress or thinking about going? Okay, here's a few. I also just got my flight tickets recently, so I've decided I'll not be exactly the whole 2 weeks, but almost 2 weeks there. I'm going to be until the middle of the second week there, and then also visiting Finland a little bit, and then coming back to Japan. But can't go this year. Yeah, people. Many people also cannot go this year. Like, it's a little bit difficult right now. Like, we've got this pandemic situation, which is making travel difficult. Then there's the special operation, which is preventing some Ukrainians and Russians from going, and because the European situation looks a little bit dangerous right now. Also, I don't think they're not going to be sending so many Asian professionals. Like, I might almost be the only one who is going there from Japan, actually. Hopefully not, but right now it's looking like that. But still, we've got 250 people registered. More people are going to register, so it's going to be far from the smallest congress. There's most likely going to be over 300 people, which is still it's a full-blown normal congress. Like, at least I don't think you need to be thinking like it's a small congress, so it's not interesting. I'm not going, because there's going to be enough people for that. The first congress I went to was in 2006 in Frascati. There were less than 300 people, and I never even thought about that there would be a few people there. So, although I heard the argument that a few people makes it not interesting, I don't think that's the case here. Also, it's in Romania. The place is really nice. It's in the middle of the mountains. A little bit difficult to get to, but that doesn't really matter when you're going there for 1 or 2 weeks, right? Like, you can go a little bit in the middle of nowhere in the mountains to have fun there with Go players. If it was a weekend tournament, then I would think twice for sure as well. Yeah, but if you're interested, I only like tournaments with at least 700 players. Yeah. This is the link to the Congress web page. I also wrote a small announcement or advertisement in the NGD web page with a picture of Uncle Sam, but you can check that at nordicgodojo.eu if you're interested. Okay, but I guess that's all for early advertisements and announcements. Are we good to go? I think we're good to go. So can somebody tell me what is the middle game? I'm sorry, this is a thing with me, but if we're talking about the middle game, we should define what is the middle game first, right? That's just how I operate. What do you think is the middle game of Go? It's not what you see over here right now. Middle game is between early game and end game. Yes, that's exactly what I wrote in one of the slides over here. I guess I can just put this slide on. Here, right? So browsery over here basically said exactly what I've also written in the first spot. The part after the opening, but before the end game. So after early game, before end game. Unclear part of the game. I also wrote this, the part of the game where the focus is on dealing with the groups on the board, which is also probably a definition that somebody would like to write here. You no longer have the same goals as in Joseki. That's true, but if we're going to say it that way, then we need to define what is Fuseki as well, right? Part of the game where groups are still unsettled and territories can still be destroyed and exchanged. Yes. Also, where shape and aji dominates play. That sounds right as well, yes? Like, I think in many English Go books, most of which have been written in the 1980s or 1970s in Japan and then later on translated into English, it somehow seems to be a pattern that we have the opening game and then the middle game and then the end game, and that's how the game proceeds. Like it's cut into these three stages and that's it. It's clear cut, easy, no exceptions, and that's not really the case, is it? Like it used to be the case, especially in the 1970s and 80s in Japanese Go, that we would have these opening patterns, which are called fuseki, right? Uh, a joseki is a set sequence in one corner, or it could be on the side of the board, but usually in the corner. That's a joseki, and a fuseki is kind of same thing extended to the whole board. So it's like you have the Sunren say 3 stars fuseki, which is a kind of opening pattern, and you have the Chinese fuseki and so on. And I think in the Japanese understanding, basically the opening game is when both players decide their fuseki, and maybe also the immediate joseki that continue from the fuseki, and then eventually there's some kind of fighting or exchange, and that's when the middle game starts in the traditional understanding. Okay, while I've been talking here, the chat has been going forward. When playing moves, establishing new groups stops mattering much. I'm probably lost in Fuseki. How is Fuseki clear? Yes, it's not clear cut. It's like the season. Somebody might say, "Oh, summer is finally here," but nobody says, "Great today at 2 p.m. It finally was summer." Also, like, it's not just that either, right? Like, it could be that you feel like the summer is here, and then you get kind of a late winter, as we call it in Finland, and then you go back to the spring, basically. So it's like you might go to middle game, and then it feels like, oh, okay, the fighting died down. Now we're back to the early game. So it's not like it's that kind of a. It's not step A, B, C only in this progression. Like there's going back and forth as well, I think. But yeah, so I think there was this Japanese traditional formula, which was set the fuseki, play the joseki, then do the middle game fighting, and then care about territory. And that's not really the case anymore nowadays. Like, especially now that we have AI, we basically know that your opening pattern doesn't matter. You can almost do whatever you want as long as it makes sense to some degree in the early game. And then when there's fighting, that's the part that actually usually defines who is the winner and loser. And then there's the end game again, and usually strong people don't make so many mistakes in the end game. So it's again relatively less important, we could say. End game is still important, but the vast majority of games are decided in the middle game. So if you just want to, like, if you're going to split the game into these three stages and decide that you will only focus on one of them, like you will only get good at one of them, then you pick the middle game. You can forget the opening and you can forget the end game. And that's how you get to Fox 8 done, I guess. Basically. You just need to be good at fighting and positional judgment, whole board evaluation. Okay, let me see the slides here. So, actually, let's do this the other way, huh? I will shuffle the deck a little bit. Let's transition here. So I mentioned the AI already, right? So now that we have Katago, which can basically say how many moves how many points this one move over here lost, for example, that actually gives us quite interesting ways of starting to analyze the game in different ways. And one of the more interesting ways that I had in my research for anti-cheating actually was the cost of passing, which is basically the value of a move. Like if in the middle of the game you decide to pass, how many points will that cost you? And those values actually tell us a number of interesting things. Now, let's do a reality check first. At the start of the game on an empty board, what's the cost of passing? Somebody here probably knows the answer, I think. Maybe I should put the empty board over here. Empty board, cost of passing. So in the beginning, it's a black's turn, and white has 6.5 points coming, right? So imagine that black were to pass. How many points should white give black so that the game remains fair? So we've got some values here. We have 8 points, we have 13 points, we have Komi. Why 8, by the way? 8 is interesting. 7.5. So we're talking Komi still. Komi is not exactly right yet. Think about it. So black starts, white has Komi. If black passes and white gives up the Komi, then the situation is that black's going to play second, white's going to play first. But because white used to have the Komi and white's paying it's basically white plays first and doesn't have to pay anything. Like black has no Komi, right? So you actually just did half the value there. If white just gave up the Komi for black's passing, it means that white would be getting the first move for free. So that's why the value is double Komi. So if Komi is 6.5 points, then the value of a move or the cost of passing in the opening is 13 points. Or if a Komi is 7.5, then it's 15 points by the same logic. Double the value of Komi. Is this making sense? It's a little bit confusing at first, but I hope I explained it clearly enough. Okay, at least one. Yeah, okay. I'm getting some agreements here. Yes. So on an empty board, the cost of passing is twice Komi. Now, what do you think happens after this during a game? Actually, never heard it explained like that. If black has 6.5 as first move, just reverse it for white 6.5 as first move. Yeah, so double 6.5 is 13. Value gets lower. Yes, in general, like supposedly on an empty board, the effect that a single move has should in general be the largest, right? Like if you give up a move on an empty board, then you're losing maximum opportunities to build something on the board. And we all know that in the very late end game, moves are gradually getting smaller and smaller, right? Until we're fighting the final cause, which is 1/3 of a point per move, or regular build 1 point of a regular move that surrounds 1 point of territory. That's a half point per move, and so on. So we have 13 points on one end, and we have 1/3 of a point on the other end. And it basically the value goes down, in theory. But yeah, as also Fetch voice saying over here, it jumps when there is a fight, but generally tends down. Right. So because we have these center moves, right? Like yeah, this is the concept of temperature. I'm just not using the temperature word, but the cost of passing is basically temperature. And temperature is better in the sense that temperature usually assumes that there is nothing urgent going on. So as long as there's no fighting, no group is dying or anything, then what is the general value of the most valuable moves on the board? That's temperature. But right, so there's center moves, like you might have a move that makes 1 point of territory while threatening to capture the opponent's group, right? So then you play that move, and then for your opponent's move, the next move is going to be a lot more valuable than whatever value between 13 and 1/3 of a point it is. Because if they don't play there, their group is going to be captured. So then we can make interesting problems like this one here, for example. So we've got this board here. Black can play at A to simply capture the white group unconditionally. And white can play at A, or I guess you can play below it too, to live. So what's the value of a move at A? Can somebody count that for me? Sandman is also here. Hi. Oscar is not listening yet, huh? And Jeff cannot join today because Jeff is participating in a tournament in Finland. This counting problem is a bit difficult because white can have territory in the corner, black can have territory in the corner, and then there's the captured stone as well, right? Middle game lecture and we start by counting points. Exactly. Okay, so we're getting a wide range of values here. 25, 20, 11. 24. 24 is sounding good. 24 gote. I think you want to say 24 swing. So, okay, let's do the counting here. If I pass, I think I can write like this. So if black were to capture, I think I need to add a black stone there as well. So if black were to play over there, we have 14 points for the captures and 5 more points. So black 19 altogether, right? And if white were to play, then instead of black having 19 points, white's having 5 points, right? So the total difference between the two is 19 plus 5, or 24 points. 24, not 25. And now we need to remember that this is the difference between black or white playing a move. Like on an empty board also, if you're thinking about the difference between black or white playing a move, then it's no longer 13 points. You need to double that. So then it's 26 points in that case. So here also we have 24 points depending on whether black or white plays it. So actually the value of one move is just half of that, or 12 points. So the value of capturing this white group, or the value of blacks capturing the white group, or of white living, is 12 points by absolute counting and 24 points by swing counting. Now you can use either way of counting, but it's just important that you're consistent, like you treat the values inside the same system. So if you're counting generally by swing counting, the difference between black or white playing a move, then the value of the first move of the game is actually 26 points. So that sounds a lot more interesting, right? Yeah, -1 for the black stone used to kill. So if black plays there, black's not having 6 points inside. Black only has 5 points inside. So assuming that the board actually looked like this, like it was the early game, there was just this one corner which looked like this. Killing or living is 12 points per move. This is actually a kind of difficult call. Like should you capture the corner or should you play in an empty corner? Because usually a move in an empty corner is still worth 13 points per move, so supposedly larger than this just the territorial value of this white living here. That's a weird middle game position. Actually, I guess it's an early game position still, even though there is a group living or dying here. But basically, what I'm trying to show here is that a move in the early game is worth about the same as this white group here, like whether black kills it or white lives. Now, I think personally, for example, if it was white's turn here, I think personally I would spend a move to live with this white group. And that's mainly because as a result, I mean, the surrounding black wall is of course strong, right? Like there's no way it's going to die or anything. But if white lives, then strictly speaking, this black group is not yet alive. So it means that in the future, if white gets 1, 2 moves like this, it's actually possible that the black group will feel some pressure. So there's, for white living in the corner, it's not just territorial value. There's also some strategic value in weakening the black stones on the outside. Even if group strength isn't involved, isn't it better to play the move with no Aji? But that also depends on what we think with Aji. But like, so what I constructed here was this alternate board position. So now that black has these 4 stones over here, now the white group's living or dying has absolutely no effect on the rest of the board. Actually, in a sense, for white to live there means that black is just going to have some co-threats in the corner later on. Like black's going to have this kind of a co-threat and black's going to have this kind of a co-threat. And if black kills it, then that means white's also going to have these kinds of co-threats. So actually, in this case, taking the corner might be a small minus in terms of influence. But as long as the black group is not totally alive, then it's definitely a plus. Because that way you can possibly get to attack the surrounding black group. So, well, that's the kind of difference. And this is also the kind of detail that we need to think about in the middle game. Like, okay, let's go back to the slides, I guess. So, yeah, we've got the middle game slide here. So traditionally, it's the part after the opening, but before the end game. And it's also the part of the game where the focus is on dealing with the groups on the board. But because games can basically go back and forth. Maybe I'll show the graphs first, actually. That's more interesting. So for the cost of passing, I actually had some graphs here. Let's show this one first. So it's a little bit small. I'm not sure how well you can see this in the stream. Yeah, okay, the numbers are a bit squiggly, but I guess it's better than I expected, actually. You can see it clearly. Okay, that's great. That's great. Yeah, so I've got this program for analyzing games with Katago, and also for counting the cost of passing for every single move during a game, right? So this is the kind of output we are getting there. So as we can see, the value is about 13 points at the start of the game. It goes a little bit up, it goes a little bit down. There are some spikes in the middle game, of course, like for example at around move 130, white's cost of passing is basically off the chart almost. So at around that point, there's some white group that's in danger of dying unless white defends it, right? If white passes, he's dead. But in general, the values, well, actually they stay more or less stable until the end game starts at around 170, I think. And then the values start going down a little bit, but there's still some centimoves, like black's in danger and white's in danger. 2010, black is again in danger. Then a few last end game centimoves, we can see the spikes. And the rest are just basically 1-2 pointers. So I think these in general are the interesting values from there. 13 at the start. It's around 7 or 8 points when the game is entering the end game. So here I think we should define end game as the point of the game when both players know what's going to live and what's going to die, and they're basically fine with the general ideas of the territories, like this is mine, this is yours, this is mine, this is yours. And after the game enters the end game, then basically the talk is more or less about where exactly the borders between the territories go, right? That's what I think the end game is. And then the values go down until it's like well, in the end of the game it's 1 point, because either you win a co or you don't win a co. So the values here are going to be 1 point finally. But in mathematical terms, the value of moving a co is actually just 1/3 of a point. And yeah, so as I mentioned, there's these kinds of spikes in the graphs. Like at around move 60 over here, we can see both blacks and whites values going up. By the way, this is just a random pro game. We're not going to be looking at this game today. But so black and white values are going up. So most likely this is a kind of fight in which both players have kind of weak groups and have to defend but also attack at the same time. Then at around move 130, we can see that just white values are going up. So that basically means that white is dying, or unless white defends, white is dying. And for example, at I think that's 229. There's just one white spike, so it's just basically a random black center move that white has to answer. But these are the. I think this graph over here is a good general idea of what a peaceful game looks like in terms of the cost of passing. 13 at the start, 7 or 8 at the start of the end game. Some spikes gradually goes down. And why I wanted to include this in the middle game lecture is just to... I thought this is a good way to get an idea of what we're really talking about in the middle game. And my argument for that one actually would be... Let's go back to the slide here. Not this one, but this one. Like, we've got this traditional transition of opening to middle game to end game, which, as we covered, is a little bit faulty, because if there's an early game fight, we kind of need to define that as middle game, but when it's over, then we're back to the opening, right? So it's not clear-cut one-dimensional forward-going progression. So I think it's actually a lot more useful if we think of the game as we've got a state of either peace or war, and when there's no more threat of war, then we just go to the end game. Because as we also saw in the graphs earlier, like the progression is kind of stable, right? 13 points at the start, 8 points at the start of the end game. The difference between 13 points and 8 points, well, it's big, of course, but it doesn't sound so spectacular, right? When you're playing 8-point moves, that means you're in end game. And you can just get like 50% more than that in the early game. So I think it's a lot more interesting if we think about like the whole board situation can be stable, peaceful, there's nothing urgent going on, in which case you're just supposed to get the next biggest move, which is usually between 8 and 12 points, we should say. Or there can be a war situation, like we can have two groups fighting against each other, in which case, as also we saw examples in the graphs, like the cost of passing or of you ignoring the fight could easily be 20, 30, 50 points. Your group might die. And it doesn't have to be so-called hot war, it doesn't have to be groups living or dying, or you absolutely having to play in this part of the board or you fall behind. They can also be kind of like Cold War. So like a group isn't exactly in danger, but the opponent is playing around it, building something, like threatening to get valuable Sente attacking moves, forcing the opponent to defend while they're building something else. So basically kind of setting up valuable Sente moves, right? that's more like Cold War. Like there's no danger of actually dying, but it still refers to the well-being of the groups. So we've got these states of peace, Cold War, Hot War. We can go between them. And once there is no chance of any kind of war anymore, then we're in the end game. That's how I would define it. So actually, in that sense, today's middle game lecture is actually more like a war and peace, well, peace and war kind of lecture, I guess. Peace should come first because a game starts with peace. Do we have any questions so far? Like we've covered the theory over here. 30 minutes, huh? Okay, so I just got one game for us to look at today, and I think that decision was right. 45 minutes is going to be enough for one game. It's my recent pro game. I played against the Kaneko Maki Tsudan, which has kind of interesting middle game considerations. But before that, let's see if there's any questions before we go there. My games don't have Cold War, either Peace or Hot War. Let's see. I can at least... Yeah, so this is the graph of the game that we are going to see today. I was black in this game. So maybe most importantly, as you can see in this graph, this game didn't have an end game. Because White resigned before that. And the other interesting thing is that just look at this middle game fighting. Like, well, there's some ups and downs until like move 60 or so. But basically from move 70 on, almost all of the moves have costs of passing that are vastly bigger than 13 points. So basically this the second half of this game was busy all the time. No peace at all. And I think that's kind of interesting for us to also look at different kinds of war. I don't think this was also exactly Hot War all the time either. Like, at least from my opponent's point of view, she could very well have opted for a kind of Cold War. Like, Cold War is a little bit more like you're giving and taking at the same time, right? You're saying that, fine, you can have that if I can have this and this and this in exchange. And then the opponent is like, no way, I'm going to give all of that to you. Let's negotiate. Gathering influence is a part of Cold War, yes. I mean, in a sense, it's like you have these kind of borders for the two countries, black and white, and at some point near the border, one side is suddenly putting a huge number of troops there waiting, right? So usually that's going to make the other side scared, so they're going to have to invest in their own defense at the same time. And then the aggravator at that point says, oh, but we just wanted some economical profit in the meantime. So you had to put all your forces there, so we're just going to do a trade in this other part instead. But so influence is basically that. Like putting power in some part of the board, eliciting a response from the opponent, and then doing something else. Could you derive the score by integrating over these graphs? No, this doesn't come to that, unfortunately. Because this is just the cost of passing. This doesn't actually say how well the opponent, how well the players played. And I also thought it could be interesting if we could kind of figure out who won the game from the cost of passing, but I haven't figured out a way to do that. Like in some sense, for example, from this graph, we can say that which of the players' moves were more urgent, or which player was more forced to do some specific thing in a game. But that's not necessarily a bad or good thing. Like, for example, black's values between 110 to 160 are generally much higher than white's, right? First of all, that sounds like it sounds like we are expecting black to be in trouble or under attack. But this is actually a situation where white is dead and black is attacking. And if black passes at that point, it just means that white's going to live, and that's expensive. So it's not it's not necessarily the defender who has the higher values. Usually it means that if there's a series of high cost passing, then you're in danger. Usually that's right. But it's possible to challenge that by taking a group that was dead and trying to make it live. In that case, the opponent is going to have to answer. Could be a huge call. But on the other hand, also call means that call actually usually evens out these values. Because even though there's a huge trade with a call, like there could be 50 or 60 points changing owners, the actual value per move is going down because you need to spend more moves to win the call. Like you're playing one move to capture it, and then you're going to play one more move to fill it. So you're dividing over three instead of dividing over two. Okay, but I've shown this graph over here, so now you can see what kind of a game this is actually representing. It's most likely going to be a bit different than what most people thought. Transition is down. You're seeing the game, right? Yeah, so I was black in this one. So I played some modern Joseki. So I basically think that if we're going with the old definition of the three stages of the game, opening, middle game, and end game, then we're going to have to say that this is already a middle game. Because there's a big open fight in the lower right corner, neither player can just ignore it. So it cannot be opening anymore, right? In the opening, it's supposed to be just that you throw some stones around and anything is fine. Could also be just random sentence. Maybe for the graph. But we don't see the graph anymore, so we ignore that. Yeah, so we played a kind of modern variation of this Joseki. This is what I expected, just a big Joseki fight exploding into the whole board. Actually not. This was a very peaceful Joseki. It just ends like this. This is something that I kind of serendipitously researched for this game. Because I think it was in March. Wait, was it April? I think in April I had two Joseki lectures for 3 4 point pincers, in which I was also supposed to cover these new difficult pincer variations, but I didn't actually have time for them. But this was one of the Joseki sequences which I had planned to show as a kind of a interesting modern Joseki that's not too difficult if you know the moves. And I got to play it in this game. Yeah, so Black's cornerstones are dead. There's an interesting string of 7 stones here, white, black, and so on. There's a little bit of Aji remaining with black A, but black is still dead unconditionally. Like black can get some forcing moves on the outside, which means that the black wall is stronger than it looks. But that's about it. White has a big corner, black is strong on the outside. So white played elsewhere. Then we get the AI era Joseki number 2 over here. Bryant KJ versus AlphaGo. Like this. And I would say that this is already an interesting point to consider in terms of middle game. Like a okay, well I said middle game, but maybe I shouldn't have. Considering war and peace, huh? Well, obviously right now the situation is peace. Like there's nothing extremely urgent going on. There is the interesting question of these 8 stones here. So it's White's turn, right? It's White's turn right now. White can play at A to capture black and save her own stones, or White can just ignore it and let black play B. Yes, exactly. So what is the size of capturing these? What is the size of White A or black B? Can somebody tell me? I'll get some tea in the meanwhile. Isn't the cost of passing just evaluating how sent a move is? That is a way to think about it. But I don't think it's sent in the usual sense in that case. Because, I mean, technically it is, but usually when we're thinking of sent moves, it means that you're doing something that threatens something of the opponent. Like you play here, and if the opponent doesn't answer, then maybe you capture the group, or you start a severe attack. That's the usual idea of a center move. But there's the inverse. Like there are also situations where the opponent is already weak, and if you don't do something against their weak group to get a profit, then they're going to leave too easily. So in that case, we need to say that the center move is also a move which threatens to settle your group efficiently, which I think most people don't think about when they're talking of center moves. Okay, so we're getting values 16, 20. So these are swing values for sure. We have 10.5. That sounds like a absolute value. 8. At least 18. Okay, and that's a nice number of answers. So first of all, if white... Okay, let's see black. If black gets to play, it looks like this, right? Like white's getting these forcing moves in center eventually in the end game. So if black plays, the shape is going to look like this. And if white plays, then on the other hand, black is going to get these moves in the end game. So it's going to look like this. So this is the difference in white territory. That's fair, but maybe a9. True. It's possible. A9? A9 is not sent, is it? A9 doesn't do anything. Yeah, so white can have an increase of 9 points over here, right? Or black can have an increase of 8 points. And then there's the small question of whether A is going to be a point of territory or not, which is kind of open. But, well, on this kind of an empty board, I think usually we still wouldn't consider A as a point, because it's possible for white to... It's kind of possible for white to get rid of it like this. Let's say that because it's not totally certain, then let's just not give it for black. So, well, around 8 points for black or 9 points for white. So that's a swing of 17 points, which is about 8.5 points per move, right? So actually, when we think in terms of the opening, just 8.5 points is not so interesting, right? Like right now, most of the moves on the board are going to be in the vicinity of 12 points. But there is also the consideration that if white plays here, then the black group on the left side is not totally alive yet, right? It's definitely not weak, but in the future, maybe white can get this kind of a move, threatening to further attack the black group. So it might be that as an extra, white also gets a move at c12 for free, which increases her territory in the corner. So that's something that comes as an added bonus. And on the other hand, if black gets to play there, then the black group is 100% alive. Plus plus black also got the 8.5 points, right? So once we get to this point, the rest of the work is basically up to you. Like 8.5 points for sure. And then do you think the strategical value is going to give you a little bit extra or not? To me, it seemed a little bit small because even after white played this in the game, she actually did play there. I thought it almost impossible for white to get anything against this marked black group, because at any point in the game, black can play here, Atari. So if white goes out, black can play a net over here, and this is not only making black group stronger, but it's also actually getting a framework in the center. And this was something that I was already aiming for in the game, like what I want to play in the future. Why 18.5? No, 8.5. So, okay, let me type in the chat. So 8 plus 9 swing. 8 plus 9 equals 17 swing. Swing means the difference between black or white playing a move. That's not the same as value per move, which is the half of that. Value per move is 17 divided by 2 equals, equals 8.5. Did I say 18? I may have said 18, but I meant, okay, 8.5, right? But yeah, so F5 and starting to build influence in the center was something that I had already in mind at this point of the game, because it works kind of nicely with the black stones on the right side. You can almost see territory already around J6 if this happens. So even assuming that white got to play one move here, then a second move, and then a third move, black's still going to live easily. Just jumping and making two eyes over here. So I'm not sure how exactly applicable this is, but if I can let the opponent play 3 stones in a row and I can still live, then usually that means that a group is rock solid in my eyes. 1, 2, 3. So if after 2 moves it was already possible to capture, then it means that this white move at c12 would actually have some nice strategical value, because the next move after it is going to be center for sure. So that's fast enough that it's going to let white decide how the game progresses. But if you can pass twice and still live easily, then I think you can just ignore whatever. Let the opponent do their thing. You do something else. Yeah, so in the game I played this one. What do you think about the board situation here, actually? Let's see. I mean, I accidentally showed my move at A already, but A was far from my only consideration here. What would you do as black here? This is a kind of interesting stage of the game, because I'm not exactly sure if this is in the opening or in the middle game by the old way of thinking. But if we're using the peace or war system, then this is definitely peace right now. L12 for lols? I think that's pretty close to the AI's idea, actually. K16? Yeah, upper side is definitely interesting. J16, sure. D16? This is the modern way, right? I wouldn't be surprised if 6th line on the right. Yeah, exactly. I think it was it? I think E was that's 6th line, right? Yes. E was Katago's number 1, I think. B14. B14 would be a little bit pessimistic, I think. Like, pessimistic? Submissive. Like, I would definitely think that black can get more than that. I mean, as I also explained, if you can pass white's normal moves twice and even then live easily, then I think you shouldn't be concerned about that black group. But of course, if you are concerned for it, then as far as you can play the game, then you should do what feels necessary, right? So in that sense, of course, a b14 is logical and a good move. But I think black would have an opportunity for more here. Yeah, black can get more. But yeah, so I guess we can call this an early middle game situation by the old system, but it's a peaceful situation, and well, as is usual for peaceful situations, there's far like a peaceful situation basically is that there is not one single correct thing to do, right? Like you can basically let your style of playing decide how you continue from here. Like if you like building frameworks, then you can play something like a B or E on the right side. If you can do frameworks with a little bit more territorial approach, then maybe C or D could be fine. And if you really like territory, then I think you wouldn't get in this situation in the first place. I think if you were a really territorial player, maybe you would have done something like just extend here on the left side. Probably also lower right corner wouldn't be for you in that case. I'm usually I usually like early territory for myself when I'm playing, but for some reason in this game I felt a little bit more like well, lower right corner was experimental. Then I saw that the resulting black wall was actually kind of nice, so I went and saw if white would take the corner in the lower left corner as well. So she did. So then I was kind of I wasn't trying to push the game into anything, but I was just gradually building this influence in the center that would finally make a difference in the middle game fighting. Like you cannot really see it yet, but because black has this ABC sequence for walling white off, and even if we think about white's move in the lower left corner, if white wants to get into the center, it has to be something like this. And this is still not too difficult for black to wall off, right? Like we cannot see it yet, but there is already a kind of border here. This is the game with the high passing cost. Although this is still the opening part. They're still in the peaceful part. It's mainly from move 70 on that the situation. Well, we will see it soon. Soon the values will go off the charts. But for now, I was just gradually building this influence in the center. I wasn't even sure what I'm going to get out of it, but it's just that I got these nice shapes, so I'm just going with the flow. So white invaded on the right side. This is actually interesting as well. Okay, black to play again. What will you do here? Like white didn't invade on the third line, A, because that would be capped immediately. White didn't invade on the fourth line at B, because that would also get capped. White played on the fifth line to make sure that if black caps, then white has at least some nice space on the right side to start forming eyes in. You can feel that the stakes are rising. Yeah, pretty much. Cap maybe. Most likely cap is still fine. Ignore and follow up top left. Continue in the top left corner seems to be the main idea. That's also what I did in the game, actually. Shoulder hit 013. Oh, that's interesting. The AI might like this one too, I think. So start building the upper side like that. R12, take the base. Possible. This would be more like a territorial approach. I think most likely at this point in the game, black can almost do anything, and it still doesn't make a difference. This is still peaceful enough. Like white has entered the right side, but it's not obvious in which way white's going to be leading there. I was basically just envisioning that if in the future white goes in the center, well, that means that black can still take the right side territory, right? And if it means that white's eventually going to play on the third line, well, then it means that the black basically didn't get to cap at A. But I was actually thinking that I might be attaching in that case. So even though this means that white's going to live on the right side, this attachment is a little bit annoying in that. So white plays some kind of honey, right? Black's going to. Well, actually, cutting might almost be possible too. But black usually plays a counter honey. And white cannot really fight too hard here, because if she tries to. Well, for example, like this is already locally a loss because white has played a stone like A. So to actually fight, white would probably be trying to keep black busy as well. But this just doesn't work for white in this game because black is the one who has all the power on the right side. So this kind of attachment, honey, sticking to the white shape, is actually kind of limiting for what white can do in the game. That was the general idea I had here. So I figured that even though white entered the right side, I'm not really pressed as to how to answer it quite yet. So I went with my idea in the upper left corner. So here we have a third AI Joseki. which is kind of common nowadays. White probably played b14 a bit too early. It made black a lot stronger. Eventually white would get it anyway. And then white played o15 to switch to the right side. And now this is kind of getting to the crucial point of the game, I think we could say. So now, especially that we got this Joseki result in the upper left corner, now it means that the A-stones are totally strong, right? There's no way they can ever get weak. Then we have the B wall, which is also like the second strongest group on the board. We have the fact that black has a move at C, and the best way white can prevent it is D, but even then E is going to get to enclose white. So there's a magic, kind of magic black wall on this triangle marked intersections here. So the center of the board is actually looking extremely black at this point. So what would you do now in this kind of a situation? Can you cut the white stones? Probably. How would we cut it? Actually a bit dangerous. It's possible, but for this kind of a white shape, we can, for example, I mean, the shape isn't going there yet, but we can imagine a white extension here threatening to cut black next with A. Of course, white's not actually going to play here, but it means that if a white stone appears at P15, then that's kind of requiring a black answer on the upper side, or black is going to get cut. So if we can kind of assume that the shape already looks like this with the triangle marked stones, then no, we cannot cut it off. Like that white shape is then too strong. So in strategical terms, it means that if you're going to go for the cutting, it most likely means that your own shape around F is also going to be cut. And that's a big investment, I think we should say. For example, it could be, okay, so if black tries to cut like this way we can quickly see that the P17 is going to be a problem, right? This, and this might be a way to avoid it, but now we got this whole ladder thing, right? Since black has A for ladder breaker, I think black's fine for it, but that's also not the only way that white needs to use it. But for now, white might just play on the upper side, still leaning on the O17 stone. It's probably fightable for black, but black has to be aware of the fact that he cannot get anything. Can't get everything here. He can get something, but not everything. And if from this side, I think this is going to be the same shape. If cutting like this, then now we are facing the problem at P17 again. So maybe cutting right now is still a bit dangerous. And do we have other ideas? R12, take the base. Shoulder hit 013. Okay, that one we saw already. N12 or Q14. Yeah, so maybe right now playing on the third line wouldn't be so interesting. So if black's going to do this, then in the simplest case, white can maybe play here, threatening to cut. So let black get the right side territory, because then again, this attachment here is going to be kind of tasty, so to say. With these two extra stones here, white can basically cut off this black shape. Well, I guess black can save it something like this, but that's going to give white a lot of forcing moves and basically a 100% strengthened group here. So now we can almost say that the center has disappeared. In exchange for that, black got this side territory here. The corner black used to have, so black just got a little bit extra on the side. But yeah, so one of the moves that I was actively thinking about in the game was to play something around here. So to make it harder for white to move into the center, which in turn means that with this invisible line here, black is actually very close to getting a big amount of territory over there, right? So I figured this might happen, and white might go down here, and because there's a kind of gap over here, maybe I would try to do something like I don't know, maybe a Keima to try to close it, and then just imagine that okay, this box in the center is mine. It wasn't my top candidate, but this was one picture that I had in mind at this point of the game. I guess these kinds of pictures are also they're one way to think about the middle game, I guess, right? Especially if you have this kind of a super influence game, because eventually you need to turn the influence into something. You don't win a game by having more influence than the opponent. I often say that. Wait, how do I put it usually again? Like, eventually you win the game by having more territory, right? So it means that the relative value of territory goes up as the game goes on. Because influence is about how you can, what kind of a difference you can make on the board, like how you can affect the groups on the board. But as the game goes on, the groups become stronger. So whatever influence you have influencing them is going to get smaller and smaller. So the value of influence goes down, and the relative value of territory goes up. So whichever player has more influence has a kind of a pressure to make use of it, and the earlier the better. So, for example, for attacking or for transforming it into territory, or well, those are the usual ideas. And in that case, N12 would basically be the surrounding idea, and very straightforwardly. Cutting would be more like well, cutting would be trying to attack the opponent and in the future look for a possibility to get territory. Usually not in a box, usually not by getting Moyo, but by maybe capturing something or getting center forcing moves and so on. But that's usually a common trick as well. I picked the Q15 instead. So this is basically still waiting. I'm trying to fix the problem at A. I'm basically making sure that the corner is my territory. I'm aiming at B cutting move next and keeping pressure on white, right? My idea was basically that, okay, I'm threatening B, so white has to play something like this kind of a jump to basically fix her shape. And when she does this, then my idea was to then attach here and to start building the center box also. Like get the corner and also get the center, kind of greedy plan. Well, I guess it's not greedy in the sense that it's something black can realistically get here, but it's certainly trying to get as much out of the situation as possible. So then white might play Hane, I would play counter Hane, maybe white will Atari and connect here, so I'm going to take this Atari here, and then white's going to have to decide if she'll prevent this black cut here, or if she's going to just sacrifice the one stone and get into the center instead, or, well, this could be an interesting give and take from now on, basically. And now the main reason that I was focusing on this part of the game was that I'm pretty sure that white saw this coming during the game. Like, we've got this situation in the center. I mean, white is obviously not blind. White can see that black has a huge amount of influence in the center. And both white and both black know that how the center is finally going to be treated is key in deciding how this game will end. So that's basically what both players are planning for, the eventual confrontation in the center. So I play this preparation move, and then we've got these usual techniques of a one space jump. Okay, anybody can see that coming. Okay, it's the AI era. The attachment is also incoming. We can see the box coming. So this is all that's more or less given to the players in this game. So then what white does is this. Go one line further. So when you see this, what's your reaction? It can be emotional reaction or it can be anything, but because we had this assumption that white A is supposedly the correct fair move. It's a usual move how the situation is going to continue. And then white goes intentionally one line further. Is it possible to cut? What's that shape? Feels a bit light. I think depending on the player, there can be many different kinds of reaction for this one. I feel like I can't attack that loose shape. I wish I knew how to take advantage. That's actually a great shape. Yes, exactly. We are seeing all these responses here. I like this one because this is, in strategical terms, this is a big part of what the middle game is about, and also what makes the game interesting. Because it's also I want more. Come contest me. Yeah, yeah. Like from time to time, it's also good to check your own games for these kinds of. If you're able to think in these kinds of strategical terms, like okay, this player wants this, that player wants that. Okay, so let's do this kind of an exchange. If you can pinpoint what the players are, what the players want, what they're going after, and how they're doing it, then you can actually understand a lot about the game. So when there's this kind of a situation that you expected white A, but instead you get white M12. I think for many persons, it's for many people, it's just a immediate reaction that the opponent plays this, then it's like, oh, that's a good move. You can go one line further. I didn't think of that. Oh no, my situation is really bad now. What can I do? I'm going to get one line less territory in the center. Oh, I'm losing. Does this sound familiar? I think there's many players like this. Like, you see the opponent's move, you see the opponent's idea behind it, and then you kind of forget to reality check it. Like, is it actually a good move? Is it actually doing what it's supposed to? How do you see inside my soul? Yeah, so this kind of a player definitely exists, and then my message is basically that you're not supposed to stop at what the opponent is saying, but you also need to reality check it. Of course, sometimes you make a mistake, sometimes you don't judge the position correctly, but at least in that case, when the opponent does the unexpected, there's supposed to be some kind of a reason why you didn't think about the M12 move in the first place. And most likely in this case, it means that the shape is thin, it's attackable, or there's some kind of weakness. And then you can, instead of getting stuck at, oh man, I'm in trouble, you should at least continue thinking like, why wasn't this move on my radar? Like, why wouldn't I have played this move? Usually there's some reason, and usually that reason can help you go forward with the game strategically. I mean, sometimes you just make a mistake and that cannot be helped, but at least your response is logical in that case, and then you can learn from it. So if you think, for example, if you didn't think of this white move because it's too thin, then you're supposed to be trying to cut or attack white. So you should try that, and then whether it works out or not should give you an idea for the future whether this kind of a move is also possible, or maybe this could become one move that's also in your repertoire in that case. But yeah, you should try it out first, right? You should try to contest it. And also, I think there's the other typical kind of player, which will be more like, okay, this player also expected white A. This player also says white M12, and then this player goes, that's an overplay. I'm going to cut and kill you. Come on, let's fight. And that's an emotional reaction. It may be correct, but it's also dangerous in that you should probably try to think about it a bit further. That's me. At some point. Yeah, emotional reactions are dangerous because there are also these cases where the opponent plays a weak-looking shape that is actually fine, right? So at least before you go for the attack, you should try to see if there's some kind of obvious problem with it, like the opponent can catch you in ladder, or the opponent is connected after all. So at least you shouldn't just in that case you shouldn't at least just stop at the that's an overplay. Okay, let's do it. You should at least continue checking after it. You can still keep the emotional reaction, that's fine, but just make sure that you don't act purely on it, right? And probably there's a number of other types of players as well. And for me, it was basically, well, I guess I'm in the group of I was expecting white A. I didn't think of white M12, but I had a clear reason for why I didn't think of M12, which is, to me, it just looks way too thin. So when I saw this in the game, I was like, okay, so it's going to be a fight. So I went for the cut. But that's just because of my reading and judgment earlier, which I think was more or less accurate here. White shape is too thin. I can actually see a extremely strong way of cutting white apart. White cannot attack A. White cannot attack B. Black has these all of these surrounding stones. Black has this invisible wall over here. Center is becoming almost black territory. And white has two weak groups at the same time. So this is just for the player with influence, this is the most ideal situation. No weaknesses, two groups to attack. Do it. Would you say it's also okay to play around and make white fix the shape later? If you can't see the cutting variations. Yeah, so basically, if you cannot think of a way to cut this white group, then of course, then you don't have a choice. So if you cannot see the cut, it means you're treating these three stones as one group, and you need to plan around it, basically. So then, well, you might still play the center attachment. I think this still isn't such a bad move. But I think the player who doesn't think about cutting also doesn't think about this kind of attachment. So the next natural thing would be, I think it would be the upper side then. So something like a M16 to keep pressure on the white stone, on the white group, surround it while trying to get profit on the upper side. It's also a good point in the sense that if black doesn't play here, it's very easy for white to play this kind of a Keima to go into the upper side, totally connect her, and make this kind of a box shape in the center that's quick for forming eyes. So it's also for building shape, it's also a good key point over here. So if you cannot see the cutting sequence, then this would be a logical way to continue here. Of course, also in that sense, in that case, you may have wanted to play here earlier to prevent white from going into the center in the first place. If you want to build the center, that is. Is there anything else? I think that's most of the comments, and we're almost out of time already. I was supposed to be showing this fight as well here. Well, I will just show what happened. So black extremely straightforwardly cut white off, making sure the A stones cannot get in trouble, making sure that the B stones are fine. White is still cut, okay? So the right side white group is bigger. White has to take care of that first. And there's the obvious black shape problem here. So white goes through. We get this kind of exchange here. White has a half eye in the corner for now. And some forcing moves against black on the right side. From black's point of view, I just had to live with the A group while the B stones remain intact so that I can still get to profit from the C stones instead. So what black wants is A living, B living, and center. If we want to boil down the points here. So like this, white still has to live, okay. Black's right side group is fine, and the cutting stones are still safe, and white still has to continue defending. Some forcing move there. Okay, R10 was a bit weird. I think it should be at A, but in general, white's doing fine. So with this, A and B are center for white's second eye. The first eye is at C. So white's alive, and black got center. So basically more or less what the black expected from the beginning, right? It used to be the situation where black cut white into two separate weak groups, And then as long as black himself didn't get busy, it means that black will get the first move to attack one of the groups eventually. So white lived with the bigger one on the right side, and black gets the focus on the other one in the center. Box seems much bigger now. Is the plan to try to kill the 3 stones or just profit from attacking? Extremely good question. The answer is yes. As in, I didn't know either. So like, it also depends a lot on white actually. My original idea here was that because the D cut is not such a big problem, because there's still the invisible wall over here. The black shape in the center is almost perfect, so it felt to me like I could do almost anything. Like I could play this kind of an extension here and probably expect to capture the white stones in the center anyway. There's some Aji, but it's extremely hard for white to do anything. It feels a little bit like that game where you have stones on the first line all over the board. Black has the stones and white is supposed to try to live in the center, and it's like totally impossible. That's the kind of influence we're talking about here. Or maybe thickness is the right word. But that was my first impression. After that, I did a reality check. I figured that actually, wait a second, to win this game, I don't need to have maximal territory here. Like, then I tried to envision that if we have the magical line at the triangles, well, I tried to make a rough judgment how much territory I need to have in the center to have a comfortable clear lead, that kind of thing. Yeah, exactly. How is the territory? Does black have to capture white? That is the key question here. Which I guess is also a kind of a middle game or... well, that's also a good question. Is this war or peace right now? I think right now this is supposed to be peace. At least that, well, let's put it this way. If I played here in the game, this would be war in the sense that this is one of the players saying that everything is mine. And if one of the players is saying that everything is mine, then of course the opponent cannot have that, right? So this is going to be a confrontation. In the game, I played here on the 5th line. And my idea was basically that, okay, if white invades at around A, I'm going to answer with B. I'm saying this is enough for me. Like, you can have some extra profit on the upper side, we can have a peaceful game, I'm fine with it. So this is like... I'm trying to think of a political comparison that's not dangerous, but maybe I should avoid Ukraine anyway. I mean, this could almost be like Ukraine saying, like, sure, you can have Crimea, like, we don't care. The territory of Ukraine is big enough, that kind of an idea. And then white starts the special operation in the center, basically. That's basically what this game was, I guess. Like, black said that you can have a lot more on the upper side for free, and white's like, you cannot have anything. Which is incidentally how this white player usually plays, but... So white started this kind of a invasion sequence in the center. This is basically the point of the graphs where black's values are skyrocketing, because from the AI's evaluation, this center is black territory right now. Like, the AI can read out that white is just dead, and then from black's point of view, black actually has to kill white. Black cannot pass because white will live, so actually the black has to be careful about his moves here. Harmless comparison, sure. I won't say names aloud here. Yeah, okay, so I will just show what happened. So white starts living. Black is rock solid, so black is just minimizing the number of forcing moves white can have. Like, white can have one Gote Eye at around A, and that's it, but that's not enough to live yet. Actually, I guess it's a Sente Eye. It's still not enough. Here also, G12, just minimizing white's forcing moves. Nice Ponnuki over here. Nope, no forcing moves. Okay, white takes the first eye over here. Sure, you cannot get the second one. White's trying to add to her forcing moves. Nope. Yeah, like, this is one of the examples, one of those examples where the strongest attacking move is actually the strongest defending move. Like, you just play the thickest shape, so that the opponent cannot lean on your shapes, and then they just die naturally, kind of. And it kind of looks like white's starting to get out, but this was totally planned, because I have these forcing moves here in the lower left corner, like this, and like peep here and jump, and white just cannot move her stones over. Like there's no connecting sequence here. So this happened, forcing moves here. Then white's finally figuring out that her group actually cannot form two eyes normally, so she comes with a trade. She plays Tari here, connects here, gives up the 4 stones to connect like this. So finally speaking, because if black connects, white connects here, black cannot cut because black stones are already getting captured. But if white plays here, black simply defends with J3, which is Sente. Next black A will capture. And that's basically the outcome of the fight, right? So I think in strategical terms, it was important for black here not to limit his options to just capturing. Like all the time at around here. But actually already when I was aiming for using this move here to capture, well, to use this against this white center group, it was already my idea that white might ignore this to just live with the center group, and then I would capture B, and that would be enough. I had made this calculation that just making the exchange for white's living in the corner would be enough. Because if that wasn't the case, then later on black would get into trouble of playing F5, which wouldn't be good enough to win the game anymore. White would live in the center, and then black's compensation wouldn't be good enough. And that's something that we couldn't have. Like, maybe in that case, black would have to play the forcing move earlier, when white has no clear way of living in the center. And all sorts of interesting things might happen from this, but most likely it means that black would also have to play this forcing move early. And then eventually, when it comes to the... What was the shape again? I think the shape was something like this. When it comes to white escaping in the center... Now it's possible that the black A move wouldn't be so good anymore, because at least there would be this kind of cutting aji here, right? And possible forcing moves and so on. So the black center shape would actually be made a little bit weaker by the fact that black played the forcing moves early, which is what sometimes happens. So, well, what I'm just trying to say here is that it was important for black to keep his options open, instead of saying that... instead of making it polar, like a bipolar, like a you die or I lose. Black's keeping the possibility of just playing this game by territory, getting something in exchange for white living until the end. So did white lose like 8.5 points when they played A3 and still didn't get the 4 black stones in the end? Yes, that is a kind of extra profit that black made, right? Like, in retrospect, this means that white ended up playing the A endgame move in the early game, which is, well, let's call it a nice extra profit here for black, right? But basically, at this point of the game, black didn't even really need to be counting the score, because the lower left corner is huge, and also black got the B stones as extra. So there's just nothing on the board for white that competes with this. Also the upper side territory at C, right? Okay, so that became a kind of long covering of this game. Let's go back to... I guess this is one of the more interesting key moments, one of the more interesting key moments of the game here. And also the white decision here. Like, just to recap the theory, I think... I would say that instead of just having the opening, middle game, end game, this progression, it's... a lot more useful if we think about the game as a peace or war, and then endgame. And endgame is trivial in the sense that the endgame starts when both players agree. Like, both players are like, okay, these are the territories, fine, so let's just fix the borders. And before that, it's either peacetime or wartime. And for those two, the thinking process should be a little bit more difficult, because you need to figure out, first of all, if there is war. If the game is totally peaceful, then you can just play usual you can almost play the game as a end game, like a territory forming moves or playing on empty nice points of the board. But if there's some level of war, as in if there is a group that could realistically get under attack or possibly captured, then there's immediately these considerations that you need to make, like how much in danger are you, or does the opponent have some valuable center move that you should be preventing, because center profit is always nice, or do you have a way to make a nice center profit? And then you kind of need to adjust around it, right? Like, for example, with this white group in the center over here, right now, most definitely, like, well, if you show an AI, the move at A is going to get a spike in value, I think. But even if you don't find A, moves around this white group right now are going to be valuable, because if you continue playing moves like M16, you get to keep pressure on white while you are making a profit. And if you don't do that, white's going to play at M16, white's going to prevent your possible value and also make the group strong so you don't get more value in the future. And this is basically what the so-called wartime negotiations are about in the game. Sorry. There is no bard, sorry about that. Yeah, so I was saying that even if you don't see the A cut over here, right? I mean, the AI value is going to spike for this A over here, but even if you don't find it, you need to play something around it. So the sample move was here, because if you play here, you already get some value, and you can keep on pressuring white, so you probably get more value in the future. So there's that kind of cumulative effect. And from white's point of view, well, for white it might be a little bit more difficult to figure out this, but from white's point of view, you basically need to notice that black's going to play at B, which is nice because of the future value factor. And you play there instead to both solidify your group right now, but also to deprive black of that future value. So it's kind of a invisible double effect. And I think this is the real challenge about middle game. Like we also had the... I'm going to transition over here. Like all these spikes there, right? As long as there's some level of war, the values of those moves are going to go past threshold, like past the usual around 12 points in the middle game, much higher. But it's about the war and the level of war. Like how urgent is the situation, how much do you need to look after your stones, or how much center profit can you get out of something. And that's what the so-called middle game will then be about. Okay, I think I'm exhausted for content. Do you have questions left now? We're at the end of the lecture here. While you're thinking of possible questions, I will just recap that the next lecture is going to be in 2 weeks at the usual time. Usual bat channel, nordicgodojo.eu. This is the website. There's some free content you can also check as usual, or Congress announcements and so on. Congress website is this one. If you have time, please consider joining. As I said, there's only 250 participants right now. It's going to be a fun Congress no matter what. But I think the financial situation of the Congress would be much helped if we can get more participants there, because they've booked everything already in the city. And if it's not going to be all used, then that's going to be a nasty financial loss there, I think. If there's no fight, then there's no middle game. You pass from Joseki to Josei directly. I mean, by the old definition, yes, but I don't like that old progression, right? I think even in that case, we would say that there is a kind of middle game, but maybe it might be a short middle game, it might be a peaceful middle game. Well, maybe the Japanese would say that it's just endgame in that case. But I think it's much more useful to think of it as there's extended peace. Okay, there's no fighting, then there's no war. Maybe there's some kind of a limited Cold War with players looking at the possibility of maybe getting to threaten the opponent's group. And then it's over, it's all fixed, and then it's an end game. So I think the war peace analogy is much more useful. Okay, seems like I've exhausted the topic because there's also no questions at this point. So I think that's it then. Thanks for watching and hope to see you in 2 weeks.